On Wednesday night, Senator Ted Cruz had his Ronald Reagan moment, as we discussed in the previous video. On Thursday night, Donald J. Trump had his Nuremberg moment. We will be discussing that in this video in several different installments, but I want to start with a couple of prelude segments. First of all, in the run-up to the great harangue, Ivanka Trump, you know, Trump's daughter and the woman that Trump said, boy, you know, if she wasn't my daughter, I'd be getting some of that. Who knows? I mean, why would he let blood relationships stop him? But Ivanka Trump said early in the evening on Thursday that Donald Trump will impose federal oversight of wages and mandate affordable child care. Does it even have to be mentioned that both of these things are blatantly unconstitutional? That the federal government does not have the legal authority to do either of these things? Well, I guess the Constitution doesn't and never will stand in the way of Donald J. Trump any more than it did Barack Hussein Obama. Now, if you had, this is at Red's Day, by the way, if you had any doubt at all that Donald Trump marks the capture of the Republican Party by the Democrats, Thursday night's speech by Ivanka Trump should disabuse you of those notions once and for all. Here is an excerpt from her speech.
This has long been the philosophy at the Trump Organization. At my father's company, there are more female than male executives. Women are paid equally for the work that we do, and when a woman becomes a mother, she is supported, not shut out. Women represent 46% of the total U.S. labor force, and 40% of American households have female primary breadwinners. In 2014, women made 83 cents for every dollar earned by a man. Single women without children earn 94 cents for each dollar earned by a man, whereas married mothers made only 77 cents. As researchers have noted, gender is no longer the factor creating the greatest wage discrepancy in this country. Motherhood is. As president, my father will change the labor laws that were put in place at a time when women were not a significant portion of the workforce. And he will focus on making quality childcare affordable and accessible for all. As a mother myself of 3 young children, I know how hard it is to work while raising a family. And I also know that I'm far more fortunate than most. American families need relief. Policies that allow women with children to thrive should not be novelties, they should be the norm. Politicians talk about wage equality, but my father has made it a practice at his company throughout his entire career. He will fight for equal pay, for equal work, and I will fight for this too, right alongside of him.
The best you can say about this is that it's ignorant gibberish. Why a corporation with the Trump Organization's reputation for incompetence, dishonesty, and serial bankruptcy, boasting about having more women executives than men as a selling point is beyond me. Can't you hire competent female executives? How is that not possible, huh? 2 things you need to focus on here are the wage gap issue and affordable child care. Study after study has shown that when men and women have the same career patterns and time in the workforce, the alleged pay gap shrinks to statistical noise. As this twit admits, married mothers make 77 cents, on the dollar because they are mothers and because they have rightfully placed the welfare of their children above their career. They as a group, and because of that, they as a group get paid less. They made a choice. And a good one, an honorable one. There is only one way this can be cured by Trump. Da-da-da-da-da-da! Federal regulations mandating equal pay for all employees regardless of any other factor. Does this not sound very familiar? Something Democrats demand? The affordable child care issue is another Democrat policy that apparently the GOP has now adopted. To be clear, caring for your child is your business, not ours. Not ours, not mine. It damn sure isn't the business of the federal government because there's no constitutional legal authority for such a thing. As a matter of principle, any conservative should object to the federal government interjecting itself into the decision of a family on how to provide child care, to say nothing of what the government is doing regarding imposing pseudo marriage, gender bending or gender impersonationism, men going into boys or into girls' bathrooms and locker rooms by government mandate. You really want the federal government to be dictating child care? Trumplicans? None of this, mind you, is out of character for Donald Trump. As recently as February, he was on record as being in favor of Obamacare. Donald J. Trump, Trumplicans, my Trumplican friends, is a liberal Democrat. His kids are liberal Democrats. His policies are liberal Democrat policies. The only difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton is that Mrs. Clinton doesn't claw boogers from her nose at the dinner table, as far as we know. This is your guy. This is the man whom you have forced on the Republican Party. This is the man on whose behalf you people, Trump supporters, former conservatives, have betrayed everything, every principle you ever claimed to stand for. Congratulations. Aaron Gardner is a lesser-known red state writer, a status that I'm working diligently toward attaining. But he definitely spoke for me last Thursday evening when he said that Donald J. Trump, the GOP nominee for President of the United States, is not my voice. Now, this was prepared before Trump gave his speech. It's based off the released text of the speech that was turned over to the media in advance. The prepared remarks from Donald J. Trump, the Republican nominee for President of the United States, are decent but lacking. The remarks, which were leaked earlier today, reportedly by a Republican operative who then sent the embargoed remarks to a pro-Hillary super PAC called Correct the Record, was typical to Trump's style in the sense it was largely about him. Oh, but the text, just the text, doesn't do it justice. We'll be getting to that here before this video is complete. A quick word search showed Trump's speechwriters used I 64 times, we 60 times, America a paltry 19 times, and freedom just once. Worse than any of that is that Constitution and liberty didn't even make the cut. Constitution and liberty those words did not make it into Trump's acceptance speech. Are you listening, Doug, me laddie? This is particularly disturbing considering the RNC delegation largely booed, if you will recall, as we discussed in our previous video, booed the idea of voting for someone who would uphold the Constitution. Okay, there was one mention of Constitution, but one. Here's a quote from Politico. Big business, the elite media, and major donors are lining up behind the campaign of Biden. This is the quote from the speech that it was Politico released it. Big business, elite media, and major donors are lining up behind the campaign of my opponent because they know she will keep our rigged system in place instead of letting me rig it in my favor. I added that because it adds to the desperately needed veracity quotient of this address. They are throwing money at her because they have total control over everything she does. She is their puppet and they pull the strings. Yeah, and Vladimir Putin has total control over everything you do, pal. That is why Hillary Clinton's message is that things will never change. My message is that things have to change, and they have to change right now. Yeah, not for the better. Every day I wake up determined to deliver for the people I have met all across the nation that have been neglected, ignored, abandoned, blah, 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 blah. I have visited the laid-off factory workers in the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals, which, no, they're not horrible and unfair, and they're in fact responsible for the prosperity we've enjoyed, generally speaking, over the past 3/4 of a century. He would lock us into a permanent depression, just like Smoot-Hawley, just like the Great Depression, but I digress. These are the forgotten men and women of our country, people who work hard but no longer have a voice. I am your voice! Close quote. I dissent. Donald J. Trump is not my voice. Not now. Not ever. I urge you to make sure he's not your voice either. The reason I say this isn't because you should or shouldn't vote for him. No, actually, you shouldn't vote for him. But rather than that ceding your voice to anyone only empowers them and eventually diminishes yourself. Be your own voice. Hey, follow my example. I'm being my own voice. Not only that, but you should also remember that the very people Trump describes in the first sentence quoted above were, until rather recently, himself, his family, and nearly his entire circle of friends. But actually, no, not until very recently. They still are. They still are. And it certainly doesn't end there. Do you believe, Mr. Douglas Vernon Gibbs, that the Constitution still matters? If you do, then Donald Trump is not speaking for you, or did not speak for you Thursday night, and he is failing to be your voice. The very foundation of self-governance, limited federal government, government of the people, by the people, for the people, has been pushed into the realm of an afterthought. If that isn't a perfect encapsulation of this entire primary, and a reason why Ted Cruz lost to the Orange Menace, then nothing is. While the Constitution doesn't merit one single positive mention in Donald Trump's prepared remarks, Doug, for his acceptance speech for the Republican nomination for President of the United States, Bernie Sanders, a self-avowed socialist, as in Marxian socialist, as opposed to Trump being a national socialist, who has said he wants to end the capitalist system, merited not one, but two favorable mentions from the self-styled Republican nominee. Here's another quote from the text of Trump's speech. I have joined the political arena so that the powerful can no longer beat up on people that he's not powerful. can no longer beat up on people that cannot defend themselves. Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it. I alone? Sounds downright Chavista-esque, doesn't it? I have seen firsthand how the system is rigged against our citizens, just like it was rigged against Bernie Sanders. He never had a chance. Close quote. While the prepared remarks for Trump are filled with a great many things and a few chilling ideas, as is often the case, what is missing from the remarks is far more telling than most of what will be said. For this and many other reasons which I have spoken of ad nauseum prior to Trump's coronation, Donald J. Trump is not my voice, and he should not be yours. And now we get to the Trump speech itself. The Nuremberg-esque, angry, negative speech about an intrusive government. Sounds like a Democrat speech, doesn't it? Leon Wolf was first up with his commentary, Red State. I actually had high hopes for Donald Trump's speech when it began, Mr. Wolf writes. Someone passed me a text of the speech before Politico leaked it, and although I didn't read the entire 66-page document, the parts I breezed through looked like Trump had the opportunity to score some hits against Hillary Clinton. Before the speech, Trump was introduced by a slick and well-done video and a great speech by a... not a great speech, given the content of it, by Ivanka that did more to humanize Trump than anything the campaign has tried so far. When Trump began his speech, he showed signs of having improved his teleprompter game to the point that he actually replicated a reasonable facsimile of human emotion at times while reading from it. But as the speech wore on, Trump quickly reverted to the angry, yelling monotone of Will Ferrell's voice immodulation syndrome character from Saturday Night Live that characterized his prior teleprompter performances. And combined with the actual rhetorical content of this particular speech, it made for a long, depressing, angry night. Which is why Trumplicans loved it so much. By the time Trump was about 20 minutes into the speech, you were left with the impression that you lived in some third world shithole and you never knew it before tonight. Although Trump was saying words that probably appealed to the majority of Americans about supporting the police, he finished repeatedly with promises that he personally, federalism, anyone? He personally would restore law and order! Which ought to have raised the hackles of anyone with a single small L libertarian cell in their body, much less the hackles of any true constitutional originalist, Doug. Then things got ugly when Trump veered off script for the first time during the speech. It's a wonder he managed to make it that long without veering off script. Ad-libbing. When discussing the Syrian refugees and angrily declared, "We don't want them in our country!" God. Oh, I mean, understand, folks, I get it. We should cut off Muslim immigration into the country. I don't disagree with that, but the way Trump presents it and the way Trump talks about it and the way Trump says it is guaranteed to turn the country against that very idea. I mean, oh my goodness gracious, we don't want them in our country? Seriously? That's what he said. We don't want them in our country. And the tone of Trump's delivery got progressively worse and angrier the longer he went into his speech. to the point that by the end he even sounded angry and confrontational when he was discussing the fact that he loved his family. Does anybody understand the psychology behind this? Trump won! On what possible grounds does he have to be angry about anything? He's a very wealthy man. He's a powerful man. He's got all the fame he could ever want. Why? I have all kinds of grounds to be pissed off. What reason does Donald Trump have to be angry? Oh, he's playing to his audience. Yeah, well, what grounds do they have to be angry? You know, what principles used to matter. Character used to matter. Not anymore. Not even in the GOP. Even the crowd seemed confused about how to respond emotionally. Like they were saying, what the hell does this guy have to be so pissed off about? Or perhaps they were simply under the effect of some sort of bizarre mass hypnosis. At one point, Trump finished an extremely lengthy rant that had no pause by yelling that the TSA is an absolute disaster! Which, in and of itself, as far as it goes, is true. But why the... I don't get it. Does that mean he wants to privatize airport security? Put it back in the hands of the private sector where it belongs? Of course not. Of course not. He doesn't have a problem with the TSA in principle. His problem with the TSA is that, well, incompetent people have been running it. When I take it over, it's going to work. Because only I can make it work. No, I'm just doing my Trump impression. I'm not pissed off at all. Outraged, horrified, frustrated, but I'm not pissed off. Hereupon, Trump paused for a breath after what was clearly not intended to be an applause line. At least maybe he thought it was. I don't know. I mean, think of that. Does this sound like an applause line to you, dear friends? The TSA is an absolute disaster! That's not an applause line. Whatever it is, it's not that. But like poorly trained SEALs who were afraid of being physically whipped by the Trump enforcers in the green hats, they took this pause as their cue to begin illogically and mindlessly chanting, USA! 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 The TSA is part of the USA! USA! USA government, morons! He's not talking about doing away with the TSA. You do realize that, don't you? Regardless of whether you agree with that statement or not, the fact that one of our federal agencies is a total disaster is not exactly a reason to begin chanting, USA! 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 And as you know, just as a general rule, and this is not a knock on patriotism, but I have gotten... I mean, isn't this true for you? Haven't you gotten sick of hearing USA, USA, USA chanted at just every opportunity, even when it doesn't make any sense? I mean, doesn't that make the people who chant USA, USA, USA when it's not called for and doesn't make any sense? Doesn't it just make them sound stupid? It's like, what is the chant supposed to mean? Originally, it was patriotic. 1984 Los Angeles Summer Olympics. USA! USA! That made sense then. How does it make sense here? But then, if you weren't live, you probably couldn't see the green hats frantically hectoring the crowd or threatening the crowd to cheer louder at every opportunity. In other words, all the audience response, or the vast majority of it was fake, as you might expect from anything having to do with Donald J. Trump. Now, what was depressing to me, and by no means surprising, is that there was almost no attempt, none, to articulate or defend the ideas of limited government or liberty under the United States Constitution, Doug. As we noted in an earlier segment, Trump barely bothered to even mention the words, and didn't mention the word liberty at all. Moreover, almost all of the concepts Trump mentioned throughout his speech of necessity involved expanding both the scope and power of the federal government beyond what it already is. And I think we used to all be able to agree that what it already is blatantly, flagrantly unconstitutional. It's tyrannical. Trump wants to grow it even more. Principles. The government will keep immigrants away. The government will restore law and order. The government will punish companies that move jobs overseas. The government, the government, the government, the government. Remember when Ronald Reagan once said, the most terrifying words in the English language are, "We're from the government and we're here to help." Good times, good times. Towards the end of the speech, Trump listed in a very perfunctory way a few, very few, liberty-related ideas that he claimed to support. He said he supported school choice. He doesn't. He supported removing regulations from the energy production industry. He won't. He'll make a deal, give it away. He promised in an extremely unconvincing single sentence that he would cut government waste, which is such a pathetic cliche by this time that it figures that someone as unserious as Trump would include that in his speech, and even then as a throwaway line, yeah, I'll cut government waste, whatever. These were read with all the conviction of a man who has been ordered to read the words on the screen in front of him, or else. And I thought, nobody can troll Trump. And then he was back to all the amazing things his government was going to do. Well, we've come a long way, baby, haven't we? From, as I mentioned just mere moments ago, the 9 most dangerous words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," to this Nuremberg-esque rant that could have been written by one of Barack Obama's speechwriters. Trump also, I should note, missed an opportunity to at least attempt to heal the divisions within the party that he intentionally caused and continues to cause. If you heard him the day after the speech last Friday, with his behavior towards other Republicans during the course of the primary, by even acknowledging that his behavior may have frequently crossed the line, and or alienated voters he needs. I realize that apologizing is not really Trump's style, but he could at least have offered something along the lines of, "Oh, I don't know. I realize that we had a tough and bruising primary, and things may have been said in the heat of the moment by candidates of both sides that we all regret. I hope everyone here understands that I bear no ill will towards any of my primary opponents or their supporters, and I hope that we can all put our differences behind us and work together to win in November." But there was nothing. Zero. Zip. Zilch. Nada. In fact, Trump announced over the weekend he's going to be setting up PACs, super PACs as a matter of fact, designed to defeat Ted Cruz for his Senate re-election in 2018 and to drive Governor John Kasich from office in Ohio. Of course, given the roaring success that Trump super PACs have had up to now, I don't think Governor Kasich or Senator Cruz have anything to worry about. But just the fact that Trump would do this. You talk about vindictive. Kasich stood on his principles, didn't show up. Cruz stood on his principles, did show up, and stood up for his principles. You know, isn't it interesting? Trump doesn't have any particular desire to go after Hillary, but boy, he's still going after Ted Cruz and John Kasich. Fascinating, isn't it? It's almost like he was a closet Democrat or something. Nope. Instead, Trump left that job to a bunch of unconvincing lackeys and hacks who really had nothing to offer other than trying to scare us all with the specter of Hillary, the Hillary scarecrow, as I've discussed in many occasions, and will be discussing in one of the next videos. Now, I realize the importance of keeping Trump on message for that night, but my honest advice to the Trump campaign is to never let him use a teleprompter ever again. He loses the humanity and occasional joviality that makes his speeches entertaining to his fans and even marginally tolerable to other watchers. Enduring an hour of Trump screaming at me was every bit as unpleasant as listening to Hillary Clinton screeching at me, and it had the added detraction of being way more steeped in fear and paranoia. Trump had the opportunity to draw some real blood from Hillary Clinton Thursday night. Instead, he delivered an address that was needlessly long, angrily delivered, and thoroughly depressing. And the way this election season is going, Hillary will probably try to top him this coming week. Next up at Red State, Susan Wright, who was also witness to the burning down of the conservative movement. It was a bizarre but not unexpected night. On the stage where the GOP's new overlord, new Democrat overlord, would be crowned, several things went down that anyone who has been a Republican for any real length of time could never have dreamt of happening. We saw an ostensibly Christian preacher pray for acceptance of sado-marriage and suggest all gods are the same. Remember where it says in Scripture, the wide is the road to destruction, narrow is the road to salvation? While marginal Christians bowed their heads in agreement rather than walking out or bursting into flames, as the case may be. We saw the co-founder of PayPal, the organization that set about to ruin the state of North Carolina economically because of a law that Republican Governor Pat McCrory signed to keep men out of women's bathrooms, step up and declare that he was a proud homosexual and that it was time to end the culture wars. For you SoCons that have been calling the Republican Party home, here's what he just did. The shorter version of that would be, well, I just showed you. We saw the Democrat daughter of Trump, Ivanka, give the full liberal socialist platter, complete with talk of free childcare and other free stuff and gimme-gimmes and straight from the taxpayers' pockets. Then, finally, we saw the big funky himself take the stage and yell at us about how horrible the world is, except for, of course, Vladimir Putin's Russia, and how he's going to make everything all better by making us more like Vladimir Putin's Russia. No, seriously, he literally yelled... He literally yelled every single line. Very Nuremberg-esque. His speech was such a rambling, steaming pile of horse apples, it will be laughable, if not for the fact that this man is angling to get at our nation's nuclear codes and people are trying to help him! It's like, I wish I could wake up from this whole thing. Everything. I wish I could just turn back the clock like 5 years and do things differently. In fact, his speech was so full of fear and loathing, heavily tinged calls to National Socialist pride, and the demonization of the other, it was like a history lesson in action. The banners were flying, the eagles were flying, and not the bald eagles. If you ever questioned how authoritarian fascists begin their reigns, last night, Thursday night, was a prime example, my friends. I ran across one tweet afterwards last night that caused me to laugh out loud because at this point it's that or cry. It was from Garry Kasparov. You know who Garry Kasparov is? He's the Russian champion chess player. Here's what he tweeted on Thursday. I've heard this sort of speech a lot in the last 15 years, and trust me, it doesn't sound any better in Russian. Yeah, you laugh, but it's... You laugh because it's true. As Captain Kalin will say several centuries from now, sometimes laughter is the only rational response. The only other alternative is despair. Soul-crushing despair. And then there was this, and I think the guy was serious. You might recognize him. He's running for the Senate from Louisiana this November. His name is David Duke. Here's what he tweeted. Great Trump speech. America first. Stop wars. Defeat the corrupt elites. Protect our borders. Fair trade. Couldn't have said it any better. Oh my God. These are your bedfellows, Trumplicans. These are your bedfellows. We're in a bad place, folks. We've been there before, but after 8 years of awful, we shouldn't be actively seeking to drive a stake through our own hearts. We are doomed by the left, betrayed by many of our former allies on the right, who have now defected to the left, a different wing of it, but still to the left. Let's pray enough people are willing to wake up from their apathy to actively fight to break the two-party system this year. Lots of luck with that. We need a new conservative home because all things conservative died last night, Thursday night, to the thunderous applause and approval of those who claim to fight for it. Did they ever really know what conservatism is in the first place? And more to the point, did they ever care? Well, another red state writer has finally joined me on None of the Above Island, acknowledging that we haven't left the GOP left us. Susan Wright made that pilgrimage a few days ago. Now, someone who writes at Red State under the handle Streef has now declared that Trump's new GOP cheers homosexuality and boos God. I'm done. Yeah, you and me both, pal. The the Trumpvention has turned out to be pretty much the Star Wars bar scene, Mos Eisley, that a lot of us thought it would be. It was totalitarianism on parade. The convention of the party that defeated Soviet communism. Yes, Democrats during the last decade of the Cold War, your party might as well have had an open alliance with the USSR. threatened dissenting delegates with physical violence. Parliamentary procedures that were worthy of a typical third world shithole Potemkin legislature were used to ram through rules that ensure that the Republican Party remained or became an oligarchy. A Democrat-controlled oligarchy, I might add. But it wasn't the abuses of power that were the final straw. It was the repudiation of the founding principles of the nation and everything the GOP has told us it stands for that is the most stunning achievement, quote-unquote, of the past week. In the early days of the Republic, John Adams famously wrote, quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." The logic was clear. Without a firm grounding in Christianity and the morality that springs from it, the United States Constitution simply cannot work. I've talked about it on many an occasion over the past few years. It involves self-restraint. Everybody has to voluntarily submit to a common set of rules and laws. The United States Constitution. The rule of law, not the rule of men. No idolatry. Only the Constitution is venerated, not the men who are elected to uphold it. Men and women who are elected to uphold it. That common language has existed, or has to exist, in the electorate. Otherwise, we descend rapidly into a society where we are governed by our base instincts, not by our better angels. The Democrats fell here years, decades ago, adopting sexual license and perversion and covetousness of the wealth accrued by others as earned by others as planks of their party platform. Now, the GOP is there as well. Thursday night, Peter Thiel spoke. I don't know a lot about him other than I refuse to use PayPal because of the egregious political causes it underwrites. Here's a quote from his address. "Now we are told that the great debate is about who gets to use which bathroom. This is a distraction from our real problems? Who cares?" We care. Trumplicans don't, apparently. "Of course, every American has a unique identity. I am proud to be a homosexual. I am proud to be a Republican. But most of all, I am proud to be an American. I don't pretend to agree with every plank in our party's platform, but fake culture wars? He doesn't have a daughter, does he? Only distract us from our economic decline, and nobody in this race is being honest about it except..." I'm sorry. The idea of using the word honest in the same proximity as the name Donald Trump just makes me laugh. I'm sorry. I mean, quite honestly, I'm not very interested in Thiel's lifestyle choices and who puts what where when he's in bed with some sweaty, hairy man. It might be of interest to him, but it is actually irrelevant to much of anything else. Quick, how many speakers say, "I am proud to be straight"? Who would have cheered if they had? Probably would have been booed. At the Republican convention. The culture wars Thiel derides are not fake. Thiel knows this. Thiel is an active and enthusiastic social justice warrior himself. His own company, PayPal, is happily involved in harassing and punishing anyone who will not agree that sexual perversion is the new black. The same people that think it is fine to have an adult male using the same locker room as your daughter are the same people who call 50+ million dead babies a choice. They're called Democrats. Many nations have come back from economic collapse, but never has a nation recovered absent major trauma from moral collapse? Roman Empire, folks. Look it up. Without morality, a society stops being trust-based, and at that point the rule of law becomes the rule of man, the rule of the judge you own. That sounds right in Trump's wheelhouse, doesn't it? Now, Thiel is advocating, as is Trump, is the rule of money, by money, and for money. But Thiel is advocating, and you will see Trump do this too because he has never signed on to anything to do with religious freedom, is using the power of the federal government to advance the cause of immorality by demanding that anyone opposed unilaterally disarm. Remember Antipas of Ephesus, I think? Either that or Thessalonica. But church tradition has it that he was given a choice by the Romans. Renounce Christ and acknowledge Caesar as Lord, or be roasted to death in a metal spit. He opted to be roasted to death. And a Roman centurion said to him, Antipas, don't you realize you're against, that the whole world is against you? And Antipas replied, that Antipas is against the whole world. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the spirit of Never Trump. That is standing on your principles, even if very few people are standing on your side with you, because it's the right thing to do. That's what you Trumplicans out there, you know who you are. That's what you've abandoned. You have betrayed your principles. You have become what you once claimed to oppose. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Thiel was wildly cheered. Ah! Here's a quote from the New York Post. It's been a great week for homosexual escorts in Cleveland. Male prostitutes contacted by the New York Post said business is booming, and Trumplican convention attendees, most of them married, are clamoring for their services. I'm not making this up. God, I wish I was. Business has been way better. I've seen 10 clients so far, one male whore said. Most of them were first-timers. Trump mania. You could tell they were nervous, but once they became more comfortable, they seemed to be having a good time. And I'm not going to elaborate any further. Now compare and contrast the behavior of the audience when Ted Cruz spoke. When Cruz said this, quote, and to those listening, please do not stay home in November. Stand and speak and vote your conscience. Vote for candidates up and down the ticket whom you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution. When Ted Cruz said that at a Republican National Convention, he was booed, ladies and gentlemen. He was booed. Take it up the ass. Yay! Force everyone else to take it up the ass. Yay! Vote your conscience, defend our freedom, and be faithful to the Constitution. Boo! And this was at a Republican National Convention. That wasn't this week in Philadelphia. Not yet. I'm sure it will. This was a Republican convention, ladies and gentlemen. A Republican convention. And you wonder why we say that Never Trump, that we didn't leave the Republican Party left us. Hello? Think about the implication, folks. The delegates knew that A, they are not voting their conscience, B, that they don't trust Trump to defend our freedom, and C, they know Trump will not be any more faithful to the Constitution than he has been to any of his battalion of wives and mistresses and concubines and whores. But they're voting for him anyway, and they are offended that they are being called out by their own craven cowardice and immorality. And instead of being shamed into silence at the magnitude of their own betrayal of the nation and everything they ever claimed to stand for, they try to shout down the righteous messenger. You know, when Cruz ended his speech, Eric Erickson made this observation, quote, "Listen for yourself. They're chanting, 'Endorse Trump!' until Cruz says, 'God bless you,' at which point they start booing. This is an idolatrous personality cult inside the Republican Party. We're not talking about Obama, Obama. We're not talking about Greco-Roman columns behind him. We're talking about a gigantic Jumbotron image that, I tell you what, if they'd had Jumbotrons in Nazi Germany, that's what they would have used. I guarantee it. They're chanting, 'Endorse Trump,' until Cruz says, 'God bless you,' at which point they start booing. This is not in the Democrat convention. This is at the Republican convention. You know, it's hard to listen to this and not recall the words of Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput. Quote, "Evil talks about tolerance only when it's weak. When it gains the upper hand, its vanity, its narcissism, always requires the destruction of the good and the innocent, because the example of good and innocent lives is an ongoing witness and indictment against it. So it always has been. So it always will be. And America has no special immunity to becoming an enemy of its own founding beliefs about human freedom, human dignity, and the limited power of the state and the sovereignty of God. Truer words have never been spoken. It was on display in Cleveland this week, ladies and gentlemen, this past week. This is a party that is unmoored from the history of the nation and its own history and from common decency. This is a party that worships, that now, just like the Democrats, worships nothing but celebrity, wealth, and ephemeral power that is held not for the purpose of moving the nation forward, but for merely the sake of holding power. This is a party that has decided it is tired of being the stupid party and wants to be another evil party. And, as a practical matter, it's stupid as well because Trump can't win. I tell you, until the Republican Party rids itself of Trump and his acolytes, I'm done with them. But then, as we already know, they were done with us a long time ago. And so we come to the final segment, and David French at National Review wraps this up, this video. And it's clear, ladies and gentlemen, it is crystal clear. Trump's speech makes it official. It's Democrat versus Democrat in 2016. There will be no Republican presidential candidate. Just two Democrats, like I've been saying for the past 13 months. Everything about that speech has vindicated everything that I have said, everything I have written for the past 13 months. And naturally, because it was accurate, Nobody listened. At least not enough. The GOP nominee proposes himself as the sole solution to the nation's ills. That is the opposite of conservative. In the battle over the role of government in American life, it's clear that the left has won, and won decisively. The era of small government was over years ago, but now it's over even in the Republican Party. As Donald Trump's convention speech made clear, the election of 2016 is a race between an old-school Democrat and a new-school communist, between a post-war Teamsters boss and a university professor. Actual conservatism is nowhere in sight. I can't recall a Republican speech in my lifetime that put such an overwhelming emphasis on the ability of a national leader to fundamentally transform American lives. A Republican speech, yeah. I mean, we had all kinds of that from the Democrats the past 8 years, from Barack Obama. Now it's coming out of the Republican Party, too. I, and I alone, Trump declared, thundered, will protect Americans from ISIS, from domestic crime, from the free market. Corporations won't move their factories. Wages will increase. Trade will magically become fair. How? Don't ask. He doesn't know, but he'll make it so. Nor can I remember a modern Republican speech that put less emphasis on life, liberty, or the Constitution, Mr. Gibbs. He never mentioned abortion or Roe v. Wade. His discussion of religious liberty focused entirely around the Johnson Amendment, obscure legislation that has kept, conservative churches out of politics. Not politics out of churches. And neglected the far more grave concerns about the independence and even existence of religious institutions in the face of increasingly militant secular communists and freaks and perverts therein. In a speech that lasted 75 minutes and felt, so much longer, he used the word freedom once. He mentioned the word Constitution once. Liberty was nowhere to be found. Conservatives are long focused on the reality that private individuals and private associations are the best equipped to encourage and foster human flourishing. Churches and civic associations take care of their members better than government social workers. Businesses, large and small, are best equipped to respond to and spearhead economic innovation. Good families are better than even the best government at raising children and overseeing their education. We used to all be able to agree on that on the right, didn't we? Thus, much of the modern conservative enterprise has been focused around protecting individuals and private associations from government encroachment, and ending government monopolies on enterprises such as education in an attempt to spur competition and restore the primacy of the family in the lives of children. This philosophy depends on a world of mutual obligations, with individuals and families primarily responsible for their own well-being, and governments responsible for protecting their liberty and security. The breakdown of the family and the increasing alienation of the individual has changed this calculus. And, of course, the breakdown of the family and increasing alienation of the individual is a product of the left and left-wing policies. A person in an intact marriage who belongs to a thriving church looks at the world very differently from a single parent living on their own, or an older divorcee who's disconnected from the surrounding community. During the primary, the more a Republican was connected to a church or to civic associations, the less likely they were to vote for Trump. Although I'm still not sure where all those evangelical Trumpsters came from then. The more alienated the citizen, the more likely they were to hop on the Trump train. Trump understands what Democrats have long understood. The disconnected and vulnerable often feel that they have nowhere to turn but to government. He's a Democrat, folks. They feel helpless and look for a savior. That's why Barack Hussein Obama put out his much derided Julia cartoon to show single women that they have nothing to fear because the government will meet all their earthly needs. Trump could put out his own cartoon. Let's call his hero Frank, describing how, thanks to his chosen leader, his dear leader, his maximum leader, his Cheeto Jesus, Frank can keep his job, increase his wages, and prevent his nasty factory owner from closing up shop and heading to Mexico, alongside a lot of Trump manufacturing concerns. Trump will keep Frank safe, limit Frank's economic competition, and protect Frank from the world economy, while he's standing in a soup kitchen, a bread line, in the expanded Great Depression II. But Trump's Frank relies not so much on his man's policies as his man's promises. Obama came to the table bearing proposed gifts, a potpourri of programs that purport to protect Americans from cradle to grave. Trump comes to the table bearing, of course, himself, pledging to be Frank's savior, his Lord, his God, and asking Frank to trust that Trump's incredible talent and winning habits will carry the day. Conservatives have to face a sobering reality. At present, they simply do not have a message that reaches the Franks of the world like Trump's does, and frankly, this is a product, this is a consequence of Obamianism. Personality cults, we've never seen it before in American history. And then along came the Roman Greco columns and the Obama, Obama, Obama. And then he got reelected in 2012, and perhaps at that point, maybe we should have seen it coming. Tea Party, endless Tea Party rage and anger and fratricidal mania. Looking, if you can't beat them, join them. Maybe we should have seen it coming. Intact, church-going, engaged families face each day with more hope and optimism and with greater resilience than their more alienated peers. The connected conservative largely experiences government as an impediment to prosperity, as a drag on their dreams. And yet, a conservative message of small government, self-reliance, and individual liberty turns out to be pretty terrifying to millions of struggling Americans, who, of course, have never been inculcated, never have been indoctrinated, if you were, in the values of the Founding Fathers as laid forth in the United States Constitution. In 2016, we learned that many of those millions inhabit the GOP ranks. They weren't ever going to embrace the multicultural communism of the New Left, or at least they didn't realize that's what they were doing. But the protectionism and paternalism of the old left had its appeals. In other words, the Southern Democrat is back. The old school Midwest Union boss is back. They have their champion, and he's the GOP nominee. For now, the left has won. The only real question is which version of big government liberalism will prevail in November. Marxist socialism or nationalist socialism?
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.